Welcome back to the EcoVantage Report. You know, for most of modern history, becoming a billionaire was considered almost impossible. Then, over the last couple of decades, we started hearing about people worth $50 billion. Then $100 billion. And even those numbers felt almost impossible to comprehend. But now, we may have crossed into completely different territory. According to reports from Reuters, AP News, and the BBC, Elon Musk's net worth has surged beyond $1 trillion following SpaceX's historic public debut. $1 trillion. Just saying that number out loud sounds ridiculous. Most people can't truly visualize the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. The scale becomes almost meaningless. But here's the thing. The most interesting part of this story isn't Elon Musk. It's the fact that millions of investors looked at SpaceX and collectively decided that this company might actually be worth nearly $1.8 trillion. And honestly, that's where things start getting fascinating. Because SpaceX didn't just go public. It exploded onto Wall Street. The company entered the market with a valuation of approximately $1.77 trillion and raised around $75 billion from investors. To put that into perspective, many countries don't produce that much economic output in an entire year. Yet investors looked at one company and essentially said, "We want in." And they didn't just want in. Reports indicate that demand exceeded available shares multiple times over. Think about that for a second. Wall Street wasn't hesitant. Wall Street wasn't cautious. Wall Street was competing for access. Institutional funds wanted shares. Retail investors wanted shares. Global asset managers wanted shares. Everyone wanted exposure, which immediately raises an important question. What exactly are they buying? Because despite what many headlines suggest, investors aren't simply buying rockets. If SpaceX were only a rocket company, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No company becomes worth nearly $2 trillion because it launches satellites. What investors are really buying is a vision of the future. And that future is built on three powerful ideas. The first is space infrastructure. For decades, space exploration was something governments did. It was expensive, slow, and largely dependent on taxpayer money. SpaceX changed that equation. The company has become the dominant force in commercial launches, transporting satellites, scientific payloads, and strategic infrastructure into orbit at a pace few competitors can match. The second pillar is connectivity. Starlink has evolved from an ambitious experiment into one of the world's largest satellite internet networks. Millions of people now rely on orbital internet connections for communication, business, education, and emergency services. In many parts of the world, Starlink isn't just convenient, it's essential. And then comes the third pillar, artificial intelligence. This is where the story becomes much bigger than rockets, much bigger than satellites, and much bigger than Elon Musk. Because investors increasingly believe that the next great economic revolution won't simply happen on Earth. They believe it will depend on massive infrastructure networks that connect data, computing power, communications, and eventually space itself. Whether that vision becomes reality remains to be seen. But Wall Street clearly believes there is enormous value in being positioned early. And that's exactly why investors were willing to assign a valuation of $1.77 trillion to a company that still faces major challenges. Because here's the part that often gets ignored. This story isn't all optimism. It's also about risk. Reuters reported that despite its extraordinary growth, SpaceX continues to spend aggressively on expansion and future technologies. The company is investing enormous sums into projects that may take years to fully mature. And that means today's valuation isn't really based on what SpaceX earns now. It's based on what investors believe SpaceX could become. That's a very important distinction, because history is full of moments when investors became convinced they were looking at the future. Sometimes they were right. Railroads transformed economies. Telecommunications changed the world. The internet reshaped entire industries. But history also reminds us that not every revolutionary idea produces revolutionary returns. Sometimes expectations run ahead of reality, and when that happens, markets can become brutally unforgiving. Which brings us to the question nobody can answer yet. Is SpaceX genuinely worth $1.77 trillion? Or are investors paying today for a future that may still be decades away? The truth is that nobody knows. Not analysts, not hedge funds, not even the people buying the stock. What we do know is this: the market isn't valuing SpaceX based on where the company is today. The market is valuing SpaceX based on where it believes humanity is heading tomorrow. And that might be the most important lesson from this entire story. Investors are no longer simply buying companies. They are buying narratives about the future. Artificial intelligence, global connectivity, space infrastructure, advanced computing. These are the themes attracting trillions of dollars in capital. And SpaceX now sits at the center of all of them. So maybe this isn't really a story about the biggest IPO in history. Maybe it's a story about something much larger. A moment when global capital looked toward the future and decided that the next frontier wasn't another country. It wasn't another industry. It wasn't even another technology. It was space itself. The question now is whether that bet will become one of the greatest investment decisions ever made, or one of the most expensive in history. If you value the truth beyond the headlines, subscribe to the EcoVantage Report. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.